Hey, what's going on, guys? Cookies here. This is our overview on how to heal Sanguine depths. So we're gonna break down mobs, not necessarily pulls. So we're gonna break down like each individual mob that's in the dungeon that's important for you to know about, bosses, stuff like that. I'm not gonna be going over very many strategies on like specific pulls or anything. It's just gonna be these are what the mobs do. This is how you avoid, dealing with or having to deal with the problems that arise from these mobs. So, first up, within this first pull, we have the noble skirmishers that I'll talk about. So, at the very beginning, if I rewind it just a little bit, you will see that they cast Animate Weapon. One does it right here. This one that I'm targeting, there's Animate Weapon. I hodge it, we stun it. Basically, what happens is if that cast goes through, it's going to spawn another ad called an animated weapon, and it just does a lot of damage with its auto attacks to the tank. So you want to try to crowd control these. That's the only way to interrupt them. You can't actually use like regular interrupts. So you have to use some kind of crowd control or hard stun or something like that in order to stop them from casting it. Like right here, another set was going off and I blinding light. And our tank also roared. But if they do go off, just be aware that the tank probably is going to need like an external or something, or you're just going to need to pump a lot of extra healing into the tank. Outside of that, there's no mobs in this first poll that actually do anything relevant, so we'll go ahead and skip ahead a little bit. Let's see, next up we have, we'll see what we end up doing here. I think we have the Brute potentially next, or just these ticks. This might actually be the recording now that I realize it where we do everything onto the boss. It is. Very interesting. Okay. We'll still talk about this stuff and break it down. So we have these brutes right here that we're passing by. We're going to pull one with the boss. And what the brutes do is just a slam ability on the tank. That just needs, so basically just keep the tank topped up anytime there's a brute in the pull. And then you'll see that they spawn a blue swirl. We'll try to pay attention to it and see where it is. Should be relatively soon. So there's the blue swirl on the floor right there. When it lands right there, it just does unavoidable AoE damage to the entire group. I think it does the same damage no matter where you are. And that blue circle doesn't actually do anything. The only thing it does do is if someone is inside of it, it heals the brute for like 3 or 4, maybe at most 5% of his HP. It might be dependent on key level, I'm not sure. But I've been in like plus 22s and 23s where it literally only heals him for like 4% of his HP. So if you have to, you can stand in the blue thing and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't do extra damage to you or anything like that. So just be aware that it does unavoidable AoE damage to the entire group, whether you're in or outside of the circle. Let's see what else we have here. The only other things we have are these Gluttonous Ticks in the group that you can see, and they're casting Engorge. Basically, if the Engorge cast goes off, for every, so like it casts Engorge, and then it channels for 4 seconds the same ability called Engorge. So if the cast successfully goes off, then every time it ticks, which is like 1 second, the channel does damage to whoever it's channeling on. The Gluttonous Tick will gain a stack of a buff, and then when the Gluttonous Tick dies, it will blow up and deal damage, unavoidable damage to everybody in the group, depending on how many stacks it had. So you can see these two right here got like a second or two of the cast off. So now when they die, they're going to blow up and do a mild amount of damage to the group. It really doesn't start to do that much damage to the group when they explode unless they get like a full entire cast off or, multiple cast off. So there you can see they died and we took like a decent amount of damage, and that is pretty much all they do. So they just need to be interrupted, and you can use crowd controls, all that stuff to help interrupt them as well. Fun fact for Paladins specifically watching this video, you can turn evil them too, that also works. So we're going to talk about this first boss now. So now that we have all the trash dead, I'll go over his abilities. So the first one is right here, like you just saw, which is he spawns orbs. With Severing Smash, you can track when this is going to happen by his energy bar. When it reaches 100, he's going to do this ability. Severing Smash, it does AoE damage to everybody immediately when the cast finishes. It knocks you back, so don't get knocked off the edge. And then it spawns a little orb under where you just got knocked back from. And now if these orbs, they like gravitate back towards the boss no matter what, and if they touch the boss, they heal him for a certain percentage of his health. I think it's about 20%, maybe less, maybe more. But either way, don't let them touch the boss. And then if they touch a player, everybody in the group takes a certain amount of damage. I don't have like a specific number, but it's based on key level. And so you can see as I stand here and soak this, we just took a burst of damage. We're going to take another burst of damage and one more burst of damage. So the idea is, what I see a lot of people do is they'll pop an immunity and just run through them all, but that just kills all the other people in the group because it still does damage to everybody. It's not just the person soaking the orbs. It's just when someone touches the orbs, everybody takes the same damage. So it also doesn't matter who's touching the orbs. You can have ranged DPS do it. You can do it as a healer. As a healer, usually I just do it myself, unless I'm in an organized group where I'm like talking to people and they can do it for me. But otherwise, I'll just do it myself, just so I can choose when the group is taking damage versus when they're not. The only other thing that the boss will do, or a few things, I keep saying the only other thing, but it's not the only other thing, so we'll just go over it, is this slam on the tank. It's called Vicious Headbutt, and it just does a pretty sizable amount of damage depending on how many defenses your tank has rolling. So when the headbutt's about to go off, you can track it on, DBM and bigwigs and all that stuff. Make sure that you keep the tank topped off for that ability, because it can just kind of randomly one-shot the tank if you or the tank is not expecting it. And then the other thing that does damage to the group is this Hungering Drain. You could just see it get casted right there, and it got interrupted. Even if it gets interrupted instantly, which it always should be, you should always be trying to interrupt it the moment it happens. Right about, where is it? It's after these orbs get soaked. So we have the Headbutt, and then we have the Drain right about now. So there's the Hungering Drain. No matter what, even if it gets kicked the moment it gets cast, it still does at least a certain amount of damage to your group. It's just if you keep letting it cast, it's going to keep doing ticks of damage to everybody. So what it does is, specifically because it kind of happened at the same time that this orb blew up, but it does, again, unavoidable damage to every single person in the group. So just interrupt it instantly, and be aware that when that cast is going to go off, everyone needs to be topped up, and you need to heal everybody back up. And then the actual last thing that he does that does damage to the group is the Juggernaut Rush, which he targets a random player, charges to them, and splits damage done to everybody who helped soak the charge. So everybody who is in between the boss and the player getting charged, like you can see here, I'm the person getting charged, will take damage. You can immune it, you can ice block it, you can use Bop from Paladin, you can use Bubble, you can use all that stuff. And that will let you soak it individually by yourself, but just make sure that you move it to the side or something so that it doesn't still hit people. I found that the best time to use defensives on this fight is right here when you're soaking orbs is the best time to use like personals and health pots and stuff like that. And then the best time to use immunities is when you're getting charged. If you're getting charged, you just say, hey, I'm going to immune this, and then you move off to the side. Like here, our Demon Hunter's going to immune it, or we bop it, so he moves to the side, everyone moves out of the way, and now he just solos it without taking damage. Cool, so that is all that boss does. Let's go ahead and move on. So next up we have, let's skip these because we already went over the ticks and the brute. So this pull is going to be the oppressors. So the wicked oppressors, they do a couple casts. They do Rack Soul, which if that's successfully cast, it's going to put a debuff on a random player. You can see right there, it just went on me. And it just ticks for a moderate amount of damage every couple seconds. I think it's about every 2 seconds. And it can stack. So if I get targeted with another Rack Soul, I'll have 2 stacks of Rack Soul. And then I'm taking like half my health and damage every 2 seconds. So being aware of that and dispelling it, because it is a magic dispel, so every healer can help dispel it. So you basically just dispel that on cooldown, or you prioritize people who get 2 stacks, which is very important. The only other thing we have here in this pack is the Sentinel, the Chamber Sentinel. It's the big like gargoyle guy, and he just does a lot of tank damage. That's all you need to know about. He just does a bleed. We'll see it here in a second. I think it's called Severing Slice, and that will just put a bleed on the tank there. Our tank dodged it, so you don't see it. But it puts a bleed on the tank for like 10 seconds, and it's a very, very heavy bleed that does a lot of damage if it goes off. So just be ready to heal the tank through that bleed. Alright, moving on. We have Oppressor still, and then we have the Grand Overseer. So the Grand Overseer is going to cast Gloom Burst, which if not interrupted, it does damage to, I think, multiple people. I don't know if it's everybody in the group or only a few targets, but I know... Okay, like there it only did damage to the Demon Hunter, so maybe it's just a single target ability, but I swear I've seen it hit multiple people. But anyways, it'll do a decent amount of damage to random people in the group. And then the other ability that he does is... I'm just going to rewind it so we can see it. It's called Dread Bindings, and what it does is it's uninterruptible, and it will put a chain on everybody who's within a certain radius of the Overseer. So if you're a caster healer, you want to be out here away from the... If you're far enough away, the chain just won't hit you in the first place. And then if you're melee, like a Paladin for instance, you want to either run away and get out of range by the time that the cast goes off, or once the cast goes off, you can snap the chain, like break it right here. You can see our Demon Hunter has it, or our Druid has it, and he runs out to break it. Or you can use things like Freedom, and I think Bop also works, to remove the chain. So usually I'll just sit in melee and Freedom myself when the chain's about to go off. And it does do a moderate amount of damage, especially if you let the chain sit on you. It'll just keep ticking for damage over time. Okay, what do we have next? Let's see. We have this room with the head Custodian Javlin. He just does a tornado that faces a ranged player. It prioritizes ranged players, and if it hits you, it knocks you back and does a fair amount of damage, so don't get hit by that. And then other than that, he just does a big tank hit that does a lot of damage to the tank, so you need to just be aware that you need to keep the tank topped off. I don't know exactly what it's called. Right here, it's Bludgeoning Bash is what it's called. And that just hits the tank for a heavy amount of damage and knocks them back. Okay, so now we're getting into the first gauntlet before the second boss. So first up, we have these Scribes. These are the most important pack to know about as a healer, or the most important mob, I guess I should say. The Scribes will spawn a swirl you need to avoid, but what we need to pay attention to is throw research. It will just target random players and do a lot of damage. And the more Scribes you have, the more dangerous the pull is. I would say if you have 2 or more Scribes, you need to be using stuff like healing cooldowns or personal cooldowns, or externals, defenses, all that stuff that needs to be used whenever you have more than 2 Scribes being pulled. Like here we have 3 Scribes being pulled and they're all separated, so you can see me kind of ducking into here whenever I am not full HP, because it allows me to avoid getting targeted by the Scribes, because they'll only target people who are in line of sight. So if you need to not die, then you can just sit out of line of sight for a moment. And you can see, like, this is all Scribe damage. Like, that's all the damage we're taking right now as a group is just from the Scribes throwing research at us. It's actually awful. So be very aware of them and try to keep people nice and healthy for the Scribe pulls where you have more than 2 Scribes, or just 2 Scribes. Even just having 2 is really dangerous. So okay, and then we have all the same stuff here, all the same stuff that we went over. So we'll move on to the first boss. So this boss, I'm not going to try to make it too confusing, but I am going to explain to you guys the strategy behind this boss in the simplest way I can. So first I'll explain the boss mechanics, and then we'll go over like the strategy for this one. So the boss is going to cast Castigate that targets a random player and does a like 4-second channel that does damage to everybody inside the circle, and it's unavoidable for the person who has it unless they pop an immunity. If you immune it, then it just cancels the ability completely and no one takes damage, including yourself. The only other thing that the boss does is spawn these ads. It's the... I don't even know what the Fleeting Manifestation. And what it does is just pulses for damage to the entire group. It's unavoidable damage. And then the longer that the ad is alive, the more and more damage that it starts to deal to the group. So you want to kill those immediately and be ready to use like healing cooldowns when those ads are alive. So when the ad spawns, that's when you use healing cooldowns. And so now, since that's the only two abilities, now I'll go over the strategy for this boss. So we don't do it very effectively here, but I'm just going to explain it again in simplest terms as I can, which is when you have Castigate, you only should really press a defensive. Like right here, I press a defensive when I shouldn't, because the only time you should really be pressing a defensive on Castigate is if the boss is castigating you while there is an ad alive. Because if the boss is castigating you while there is an ad alive, you are going to take an incredible amount of damage if you don't have an immunity. So whenever the ads are live, that's when you should use defensives. And then whenever you get targeted by Castigate and an ad is alive, that's when you should press an immunity or a very big defensive or use other things like that to keep yourself alive. But like right here, the boss is about to do... so like right here, he's spawning an ad and now he's going to do a Castigate. So whoever gets this Castigate needs to press something big. So there we go. And I'm ready to heal him a whole bunch because, I mean, even through his defensive, he literally took that... He took like 2 health bars worth of damage. And then here, for instance, the boss is about to do a Castigate, but there's no ad alive because the next ad doesn't spawn for another 10 seconds. So here he's about to do a Castigate. So this person, in theory, shouldn't need a defensive because I can just sit here and heal him. I do bop him because the boss is already dead anyways, so I'm just using it for damage reduction because it'll carry over into the ad, but hopefully you get the idea. Don't defensive the Castigates, defensive the ads, because the ads are what are way more dangerous. And then if you have a Castigate going off during an ad, you pop like everything you humanly can to stay alive because it gets very out of control very fast, as you can see right there. Okay, but we do end up killing it. We do end up moving on, so let's move on. Nothing important here. The Frenzied Ghouls just do a lot of tank damage, so keep the tank nice and healthy. And then we just have Scribes as usual. And then we go downstairs, and we have all the same ads that we fought before. Just some Oppressors. So now we're going to talk about this next boss. So what she does is cast Iron Spikes on the tank. And it will just do a fair amount of damage, and it will do a heavy amount of damage if the tank has no defenses rolling. So if you see that the tank isn't pressing any buttons for the Iron Spikes, you should use an external on them. The next thing that the boss does is right here, where she spawns all these golden orbs around the room. It's called the Rite of Supremacy. And you want to pick up 3 to 4 orbs typically on the floor. And what that will do is reduce the amount of damage you take from this explosion at the end of the cast. So she'll have an explosion that she does at the end of the cast, and you take less damage from the explosion based on how many orbs you picked up. Each orb is 20% reduced damage. So typically you want to go for 60 or 80% reduced damage. The reason you don't go for 100 and pick up 5 orbs is because then you're taking away orbs from your group because there's not that many orbs on the floor for everybody. And then following up that explosion with the Rite of Supremacy, she's going to cast Endless Torment, which is a 5-second channel, and it's going to spawn all these little swirlies that you have to dodge while also simultaneously doing a bunch of damage to the entire group. Fun fact, this ability does scale with Fortified, so on Fortified weeks this hits harder than on Tyrannical weeks. So be aware of that. So you need to be on the move and do AoE healing at the same time. It's very obnoxious for a lot of different healing classes, but as long as you are prepared ahead of time and planning defenses or externals, use externals on people who maybe don't get the right amount of orbs, or if they are taking a lot of damage, like right here, if you see, like for instance, when this explosion goes off, what I should be technically doing here is saying, okay, I need to use my sack on somebody who's taking a fair amount of damage. So like right there, the Warlock took a lot of damage. Maybe I use sack, and I actually did. Cool. So we actually did what we wanted to see. So we sack the Warlock because if we didn't, he probably would be dead right now. Because I find it easier to heal myself while on the move than healing other people, especially as certain healing classes. It just is a lot simpler. So yeah, that's the idea. And then you just plan defensives, externals, healing cooldowns, and you want to have something rolling or something going for each set of these Rite of Supremacies and the channel that follows after. to keep the group nice and topped up. And then as soon as this channel is over, the Endless Torment, you want to be healing the tank back up to full health if they're not full health to survive the tank hit that happens that we talked about at the very start, the Iron Spikes. Cool. So that is that boss. Next up, nothing going on in this pack, so we'll move to the Gauntlet. Okay, so the way the Gauntlet works is you'll see a weak ore in the middle of my screen. It's kind of covered up by some of my stuff, but she does something called, I think it's like Wicked Rush or something like that, but we're just going to call it the Blink Step because that's what the weak ore calls it. So when this weak aura fills up, and you'll see once all this stuff's gone, you'll see it easier. So let me fast forward actually. That's unfortunate that I died. So here's the Blink Step. When it finishes right here, that's just telling me when the ability is going to happen. So now she's about to dash to, she's just going to pick one random player in the group and dash to them and apply a bleed to them and everyone around them. The bleed does initial damage, so she hits whoever she applies the bleed to with like heavy initial damage. They'll take like half of their HP and damage. And then after that, they take 10 seconds of a bleed that does a fair amount of damage. So there you can see either the mage or the warlock got targeted, but they were standing next to each other, so they both got hit and both got the bleed. So it's very important that you spread out from other players when the ability is about to go off, or just stay spread out at all times if you don't have something like the weak ore to tell you when it's going to happen. And then as a healer, you just want to heal whoever gets targeted by the bleed and keep them topped up, because if they're not topped up, there's a lot of other stuff going on that can kill them instantly if they're not full HP, as you're seeing happening right now to the warlock. And then here the ability is about to go off again. I think we're gonna, oh no we're not. So there it targeted me, but the Demon Hunter was next to me because I was in melee in a bad spot. So we both got hit by the bleed. So being aware of how that works is very, very important. Okay, and then we have the last boss. Last boss is very straightforward. People are going to get targeted by Wicked Rush. It targets 2 people at a time. And then the boss will dash to you and apply a bleed to you. You can avoid it if you can see what I was trying to do there. If you are moving and have some kind of movement speed ability going, or if you're far enough away from the boss, you can actually outrun her because she'll dash to you and you'll get away from this bleed, because this is like the AoE. It's the same way that the tunnel that we just talked about works in the Gauntlet, where she dashes to you and then applies a bleed to you and everyone around you. So you want to get away from other players, and then you can avoid it if you're in the process of moving, but don't worry too much about dodging it. You can also just out-heal it. And then we dodge stuff. Here we're targeted by Wicked Rush again, and this is what you really want to avoid, is getting 2 stacks of the bleed. If anybody gets 2 stacks of the bleed, that's when it starts really being like potentially dangerous to the group wipe. So here I use my horse and I run, and that time I actually avoid the bleed. So that's the idea of avoiding the bleed if you get a second one. And then she's just going to do a decent amount of damage to the group with this Gloom Squall, and then the fight rinses and repeats, and that is literally it. So she just targets people, dashes to them, applies a bleed, and does some damage. So you just keep the group nice and healthy and keep people topped up who have the bleed. And that is about it. And every time the Gloom Squall happens, all the bleeds will get reset and removed from people, because the barrier that the tank puts down, or whoever has the barrier, when they put it down, it will remove all bleeds off of people who stand inside of the barrier. So I'll just let this play out just so you can see it one more time. So she's going to jump away, we throw down the barrier, and then it removes all the bleeds from everybody who had a bleed. And now we just heal everybody up, and now we're ready to heal whoever's getting targeted by the dash in case they get hit by it. And that is it. So that covers Sanguine Depths. I hope this video was useful. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Have a good one, and I hope you're enjoying 9.2. See ya.